iConiCon. Today we're going to cook Kronk's spinach puffs from the Emperor's New Groove. This recipe comes to us courtesy of Gluttonous Geek. So kind of throughout this, I'm going to give you some of the research that the author of the Gluttonous Geek website came up with to tell you a little bit about why we're using the ingredients we're using today. I hope you enjoy while we cook. All right, before we get started with cooking, you'll need to make sure that you have some equipment ready. You'll need a large skillet, a spatula, some measuring cups and spoons, a couple mixing bowls, and if you have one with a lid or some foil or something else that you can cover with, some parchment paper, a baking sheet, cutting board, and a knife. And then we'll be crushing some peppercorns. You can either use the bottom of a coffee cup or a spice grinder. So we're going to go through the ingredients that you'll need for this recipe. First thing you'll need is some masa, which you can find in the Hispanic, Mexican, or international food aisle at any local grocery store. Sour cream, lemon juice, fresh flat spinach, cooking oil, here I'm using vegetable oil, salt. The recipe originally calls for pink peppercorns, but if you can't find just pink peppercorns, you can use white pepper and some mint, feta cheese, honey, and then about 2 to 2.5 cups of water. All right, so we're going to start by rinsing off the spinach, making sure that we get any pesticides, anything left over from the store off of it, just kind of give it a quick little rinse. All right, so now that we've washed our spinach, we're going to chop about 4 cups of spinach. We're going to put 3.5 cups in one of our mixing bowls and reserve half a cup for later in the recipe. Now, a little bit about chopping spinach. You can take your own path to doing it. I like to try to stack some up and then slice it down in ribbons to try to keep as much of a uniform shape and size as possible. So a little bit about why we're using spinach. So Emperor's New Groove took place in pre-Columbian America, roughly the Incan Empire. So spinach may not have been something that they had around at the time. Now, the Gluttonous Geek says that this is probably as close as we're going to get to what we could find as far as leafy greens that would have been available to Kronk during his cooking adventures. So just take your time. No need to rush chopping up your spinach. Make sure that you get a nice even mix of the stems and the leaves in both of them. Try to fill up your 3.5 cup first, just to make sure that you're getting what we're going to be wilting together first. You can always come back and add more if you don't quite have enough. Alright, so we've finished chopping our spinach. We have our little half cup reserve here that we're going to use for our dough, which we'll go over the dough here in a little bit. And then we have our 3.5 cups of spinach that we're going to wilt. So to start the wilting process, what we need to take 2 tablespoons of our cooking oil and put it directly into the skillet. And we're going to turn that on to low heat. Now we're going to start by letting that oil heat up before we add our spinach. The other ingredient you're going to need for the wilting process is that lemon juice. Alright, we've let our oil warm up, and so now we're going to take our spinach. We're going to kind of toss it down in there. Depending on the size of your skillet, you may have to do your spinach in batches. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of drizzle it all in there. And once you get your spinach in, if you do it all in one batch, you'll just need to put lemon juice in once. If you do it in multiple batches, you're going to need to add lemon juice to each batch. So since I'm able to do it all, I can do a nice healthy drizzle of lemon juice. Just kind of circle it around, trying to get a little bit everywhere. And now to wilt, what we're going to do is just kind of mix it up a little, and we're looking to let the spinach soften. It will turn a brighter shade of green. We don't want to overcook our spinach. We want it to still have a little bit of that crunch, and we want it to still have a lot of that vibrant green and a lot of those nutrients. If we overcook it, it's going to get really limp. It'll lose some of its flavor, and it'll lose some of the nutritional benefit to it. Alright, so we've cooked our spinach down for a couple minutes. You can see here that it's a very vibrant green. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and turn off our stove, and we're going to take that spinach and put it back into one of our bowls. We're going to let it cool down for a few minutes before we add in the next bit. This is going to be part of our filling for our spinach puffs. Now that our spinach is cooled, we're going to continue to build our filling. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to start with those spices. So I mentioned earlier that you could use pink peppercorns. They are pretty hard to come by. Just to kind of give you a little idea of why pink peppercorn was chosen, pink peppercorn would have been indigenous to the Incan Empire in pre-Columbian America. It's related to the cashew tree, so if you do choose to use pink peppercorns, if you have somebody in your family that has a nut allergy, specifically to cashews or other tree nuts, I recommend switching and using the white peppercorn and mint. It gets a very similar flavor profile to the pink peppercorn with less of an allergy concern. So I'm going to go through the method of using the white pepper and the mint. We're going to start by measuring out half a teaspoon of the white peppercorns. And you're going to just put them on top of your cutting board. And then you're going to take a coffee mug. Just use the bottom of it and press down until you kind of hear the cracking. Now, if you have a spice grinder, you can just put your white peppercorn and some chopped up mint directly in your spice grinder and run it for a couple pulses, and it'll get you the same consistency that we're looking for here. Okay, so now that I've crushed that up, I'm going to kind of scrape it over to the side, and I'm going to pull out some fresh mint. You can get this in the produce section. I'm going to use just a couple mint leaves. So I'm going to use 3 mint leaves here of roughly the same size. And then you're just going to take them and you're going to chop them up nice and small, nice and fine. You might have to make a couple passes to get to it. And then once you have your mint chopped up and you have your peppercorns crushed, go ahead and mix them up, and then we can throw them into the bowl. So we've added our spices, our mint, peppercorn, white peppercorn, and pink peppercorn into our spinach. Next we're going to add our dairy. So a little bit about dairy. In pre-Columbian Peru, there wasn't cows. Primarily they would have gotten their milk from llamas. But we're not going to go out and milk Cusco. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to make an approximation of what it would be like to have llama cheese. So llama cheese has been related to camel's milk cheese, which is been related to a sweeter version of feta. So that's why we're using feta. So I don't need you to go out and get llama milk cheese or camel milk cheese. We're just going to use some feta and some sour cream. And then we're going to use a dribble of honey just to sweeten it up a little bit to try to get to that same sweetness as a llama's milk. So we're going to start by adding about 1/8 of a cup of sour cream. And then we're going to do 1 cup to 1.5 cups of feta. This is really going to depend upon how much feta you want to include in it. I'm using 1.5 cups, so this is about 12 ounces. So you'll just dump it right on in. And then you can use your spoon or a spatula to scrape down in there. And we're going to fold this together to try to get a nice mixed consistency between all of the ingredients, so that it's nice and creamy and cheesy and spinachy. And as we're getting it mixed up, what we can do is we can pull out our honey. Go ahead and add a dribble to it. And this doesn't have to be a lot because we're going to be adding some more honey to our dough and then on top to add some additional sweetness at the very end. Just like 1 or 2 quick little ribbons. And then get that mixed in. Once you have it nice and evenly mixed, we're going to cover it and we're going to put it in the fridge to chill while we make our dough. Alright, so we're going to start working on our dough. Before we get started, we're going to take some honey. We're going to put it in a microwave safe dish, which could be a separate dish or the honey jar, depending on which type of honey container you've got. We're going to put it into the microwave for about 30 seconds just to thin it out a little bit to make it easier to mix and drizzle. Okay, we're going to start mixing up our dough. So to get started, we're going to pour 2.5 cups of water into our mixing bowl, our 1/2 cup of spinach that we reserved from when we chopped it all up. Make sure you get it in there. And we're going to do 1 teaspoon of salt. We're going to do 2 tablespoons of honey. Now a little bit about the honey. So we warmed it up to thin it out, but in pre-Columbian Incan Empire, they wouldn't have had the traditional honeybee like we had today, but it's believed that they would have had some smaller bee that would have also produced honey in some quantity. So while not 100% accurate, it's pretty close. And then we're going to add a splash of lemon juice. And we're going to slowly mix in our 2 cups of masa. So the reason we're using masa instead of flour is that in the Incan Empire they wouldn't have had access to wheat. So our spinach puffs aren't going to be like a spanakopita or a puff pastry. They're going to be more like an arepa. What you're going to do is you're going to slowly add your masa into your liquid using a rubber spatula to mix it together and to knead it into a dough. So we've got our first cup going in. We've got that mixing up. So you'll see here that it's still runny. It's not very thick yet. Okay, so now we're going to add our second cup. And remember, we're going to continue to stir it in. And we're looking for this to become a smooth, consistent dough. It might still be a little sticky, but that's okay. Now, if as you start to mix it, you think that it's getting a little too crumbly, you can always add a little bit more water. If you think it's way too sticky, you can always add a little bit more masa. We're really just looking for a consistent, smooth dough that you can handle, and we're going to be rolling it up into balls and then flattening into disc. So you'll see here, mine's still very runny. It'd be very hard to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and just scoop up a little bit more and slowly add it in until I start to get the consistency that I'm looking for. So it's important to make sure that you scrape the sides and you kind of fold it in on itself to make sure that we're getting any pockets of liquid and any pockets of dry stuff mixed in really, really well. All right, that's what we're looking for. So now that we've gotten our dough made and we've gotten our filling chilled, we're going to pull it all together and make our spinach puffs. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to work on pulling out some dough. We're going to want to make probably about a 1/4 cup size ball. And we're going to make them going down our baking sheet that we have lined with parchment paper. I highly recommend using parchment paper, otherwise this will stick to everything. So you're going to start by making your balls and laying them out into nice, neat little rows. And if you have to make them in multiple batches, that's totally fine. If you have extra parchment paper and extra baking sheets lying around, you can just make a whole big assembly line of your spinach puffs. So I'm going to do about 6 of the dough balls right here on this baking sheet. So I'll have to do a couple batches to get through all of my dough and all of my filling. Now, you can make these bigger or smaller depending on your preference. If you decide to make them smaller, it will be less filling inside and it will impact cook time. If you decide to make them bigger, it might make it a little bit harder to handle them. So now that we've got even row, 3 and 3, we're going to take our spatula and we're going to flatten them out. You want to try to get them probably about a 1/2 inch thick or so, uniformly. You're going to do that to all of your little dough balls that you've made. Once you get them all flattened out, we're going to put filling in 1/2 of the flats here. So you're going to want to take your filling, and you might want to give it a quick stir just to be safe. Make sure that it's nice and mixed up, that if you've had it in the fridge a little while, you don't have any film or anything built up on top. Then you're going to scoop some right into the middle of half. You press it down a little. You're going to want to make sure that you don't get it too close to the edges because we're going to be sealing the other sides on top. Now I will say this is not an easy science to figure out the filling to dough ratio. So as you make these, as you play around with them, I encourage you to play around with the amount of filling that you use, the size of the dough balls that you're using, and figure out what tastes best to you and what cooks up best for you and your friends and family. Now once we've got the filling in, we're going to take the other dough that we flattened out, and we're going to lay it right over top, and then we're just going to kind of pinch all of this together so that it forms a little pocket. Make sure that you've got it all sealed up because you don't want any of that delicious filling to come out while we're pan frying these here in a minute. Right, so there we have it. Those are all sealed up. Our next step is going to be to cook them up. Alright, so now that we've assembled our spinach puffs, we're going to cook them in a pan fry. So you're going to heat up the pan with medium to medium high heat, coating the bottom in oil. Then we're going to take our assembled arepas, double check that all of the edges are nice and sealed. We're going to drop them right into the oil. You're going to have to cook these in batches because you don't want to overcrowd your pan. Oh, it looks like I got a little hole there on top, so I'll just go ahead and pat that down. We're going to cook these for 5 minutes on each side until it's a nice golden brown. And that will make sure that our dough gets cooked all the way and that all of that cheesy spinachy goodness on the inside is melted together. So once you start to see some golden brown up on the sides, you can go ahead and flip them. Flip them very carefully. Try to do your best to avoid getting the oil to splash because it's very hot. I recommend, if you can, trying to gently slide it or using another fork or something with your spatula to gently lay it down so it doesn't splash down onto you. Again, we're looking for a nice golden color, about 5 minutes on both sides. Okay, so once you've got them cooked on both sides, you're going to go ahead and take them out of your pan. You can place them back on your original baking sheet with your parchment paper or on another baking sheet or a plate with a paper towel to let them cool and drain a little. And once they cooled off, we'll go over garnishing them and we'll take a look at what they look like. And now that they've cooled, we're going to go ahead and garnish them. And you can play around with garnishing. I'm going to use a couple pieces of fresh spinach and then a couple little mint leaves just to add a little bit of extra flavor. And a quick hit of honey. But you can use those pink peppercorns, you can use white peppercorns, you can play around with it, do some like fresh fruit, pretty much anything you want to add to it you can, just to top it off and give it a little bit of extra flavor. Now let's take a peek at the inside of one of these. Got a nice crunch on the outside that you can hear there. And there we go, all that melty, cheesy goodness. You can see the steam still coming off of it. There we go, those are our Kronk spinach puffs. I hope that you enjoy our mostly accurate adventure into the fantasy world of the Emperor's New Groove.